It's late afternoon at a well outside a town called Nahor, and a servant is doing the most ordinary thing in the ancient world. He's getting 10 camels to lie down for the evening. A camel doesn't lower itself the way a dog does. It folds. The front legs buckle forward at the joint, the chest drops, the back end follows, and the whole animal comes down in stages until it's resting in the dust. Genesis gives it one clipped line. He made the camels kneel down outside the city by a well of water at the time of the evening. The Hebrew verb sitting under, made to kneel, is Barak. Now hold on to that word, because a few books later, Aaron and his sons are handed the most repeated benediction in Scripture, and it opens with those same 3 consonants. The Lord bless you and keep you. Bless. Barak. The camel word. We say bless constantly. Somebody sneezes. A cashier hands you your change. We stitch it onto pillows. We sign off emails with it. We tell people to have a blessed day. And the term has gotten so light that it barely lands anymore. It floats. It means something warm and vague and generally upward, like a wish with good manners. The Hebrew has a joint in it. It has weight and a direction, and the direction is down. In Scripture, blessing moves downward. Somebody who has something bends towards somebody who needs it and hands it over. And once you see that shape, you start catching it everywhere. In the first chapter of Genesis, in a promise made to a childless man from Ur, on 2 rolled scraps of silver buried outside Jerusalem 600 years before Christ, in the last thing the disciples ever saw Jesus do with his hands. Let's get the language straight first, because the honest version is more interesting than the tidy one. Hebrew works on roots. 3 consonants carry a core idea, and the vowels and prefixes and suffixes bend that idea into nouns, verbs, names, and adjectives. The root behind our word hands us a small family you'll meet constantly in the Bible. Barak, the verb, is usually translated bless. It shows up over 300 times. Barek, the noun, means knee, just the joint, the thing you bang on a table leg. Baraka, the other noun, means a blessing, and it can also mean a present, an actual object you carry to somebody. The standard lexicons list all of this under one heading, and they define the verb the same way, starting with the physical sense of kneeling and moving out to the sense of blessing. It's a livelier question than that sounds. Some scholars argue that the ancient Semitic languages carried 2 separate roots here that happen to sound alike. Think of how our English word bat covers a wooden club and a small flying mammal, with no relationship between the 2. That debate is real, and it hasn't been settled. Here's the thing. You don't have to settle it, because the biblical writers themselves put the 2 senses side by side and clearly heard them together. Watch Solomon at the dedication of the temple. He climbs onto a bronze platform in front of the whole assembly, and Chronicles says he knelt down upon his knees. The verb is barak. The noun right behind it is barek. The writer is stacking them in one breath. Psalm 95 does the same move as an invitation. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. Kneel, there is Barak again. And back at that well in Genesis, the camels drop to their front joints on the same verb that will later carry the priestly benediction. Whatever the deep prehistory of the root turns out to be, Hebrew speakers were hearing a bent knee inside their word for blessing. That's not a theory anyone has to import. It's sitting on the page. Centuries later, Jewish scholars sat down to translate their scriptures into Greek, and they hit this verb and had to choose. What they landed on was eulogio, which literally means to speak well of. That's the term the New Testament writers inherited, and it's where our English word eulogy comes from. That's what we say over a person at a funeral, usually somebody who can no longer speak for themselves. The Greek carries the mouth. The Hebrew carries the knee. Stack them, and you get the whole gesture, going low and speaking good over someone who can't say it over their own life. So keep the picture. When somebody in the Bible blesses, something in the scene goes low. Before we go to Genesis, one detail that shifts the whole feel of the word. A bracha in Hebrew can be a physical object, not a sentiment, a thing with mass that you hand to somebody. Jacob has spent 20 years dreading his reunion with Esau, and when the brothers finally meet on the road, Jacob pushes gifts at him. Goats, camels, cows, donkeys, a moving wall of livestock sent ahead in waves. Esau tries to refuse, and Jacob says, "Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee." Count the list in Genesis, and it runs past 500 animals. The word he uses for that whole moving herd is baraka, because in his language, the term covers anything you can physically place in another person's hands. Abigail does the same thing years later. She loads donkeys with bread, wine, 5 dressed sheep, roasted grain, raisins, and pressed figs, then rides out to intercept David before he does something he'll regret. The narrator calls that food a baraka, 200 loaves of bread, a blessing. We've inherited a version of the word that lives almost entirely in the air, which is why "I'll pray for you" and "sending blessings" can feel so thin when someone's rent is due. The Hebrew doesn't let you get away with that quite as easily. In the world of the text, a blessing shows up with a smell and a weight, and somebody has to carry it. Keep that in mind for the rest of this. When God blesses, He isn't handing out compliments. The first time blessing appears in the Bible, nobody is praying and nobody is at a temple. It's day 5 of creation. The water fills with swarming life and the sky fills with wings, and Genesis says God blessed them. Then He tells them what the blessing is for. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the seas, let birds increase on the earth. That's the content of the blessing. It's a capacity. Fish and gulls and whales are handed the ability to make more life, and to keep making it after their maker steps back. The blessing is power on loan, permanently. Day 6, He does it again with humanity, and the language repeats almost word for word. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Then He adds responsibility on top, which is its own kind of gift, and He points the first man and woman at the plants and says, "Here, food, all of it, yours." Notice what's actually happening in the grammar. God is the subject. Creation is the object. Everything flows one direction, from the one who has everything toward the ones who have just started existing and can't produce a thing on their own yet. Nothing is coming back up. There's no exchange, no reciprocity, no one to thank Him yet, because the creatures being blessed are about 11 seconds old. That is the shape the word carries from the very beginning. Blessing runs downhill. And then Genesis does something you'd never predict. After the sea creatures and the birds and the man and the woman, the third thing God blesses in the Bible isn't alive. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it He had rested from all His work which God created and made. He blesses a day. Everything blessed up to that point received a capacity to produce something. Fish make more fish. Gulls hatch more gulls. People raise children and plant gardens and build cities. Now a block of hours gets the same verb, and hours don't multiply. A day has nothing to give back and nothing to grow. So what's the blessing on a day for? For the people standing in it. God pours something into the 7th day and then hands the day to human beings. And the only way to receive it is to stop working and be there. You can't earn a day. Nobody manufactures one. It arrives whether you were productive or useless all week. And the blessing sitting in it was placed there before there was a single human being to observe it. That's the pattern the rest of Scripture will keep filling in. Blessing comes down. We receive it with open hands or we miss it, and the receiving usually requires us to get lower than we'd like. Roughly halfway down the first book of the Bible, the camera stops sweeping over nations and lands on a single family. Abram is 75. He's living in Haran, married to a woman who cannot have children, and he has no reason to expect anything remarkable to happen to him ever again. Then God speaks, and in 3 short verses, the blessing word lands 5 separate times. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. 5. In 3 verses. When Hebrew wants to lean on something, it repeats it, and this passage is leaning hard. But look at the second one on that list, because it's the hinge. You shall be a blessing. Abram receives, and the receiving turns him into a conduit. He isn't a reservoir where the blessing stops and pools. He's a channel that has to keep flowing, or the whole promise dead ends in one tent in Canaan. The last line makes that explicit. Every family on earth is meant to end up downstream of this one man. There's a wrinkle in that passage worth surfacing, because English flattens it. The 2 curse words are different Hebrew verbs. The first one, describing what people might do to Abram, is kalal, which carries the idea of treating something as light, trivial, of little account, dismissing him, waving him off. The second one, describing God's response, is arar, the heavy word, an actual curse. So the promise is more searching than the English suggests. Somebody who merely shrugs at what God is doing through this family is standing on the wrong side of something serious. That's a sobering sentence, and it's meant to be. It's also not a transaction. English makes it sound like a vending machine, where you insert the right behavior toward the right people, and prosperity drops out the bottom. Genesis isn't offering a technique. It's telling Abram that God has bound his own reputation to this family, and that history is going to organize itself around what happens to them. The proof is in what follows. Abram gets the promise at 75 and waits 25 years for the son. He lies about his wife twice. He hands the best land to his nephew and takes the scrub. He dies owning one field with a cave in it, purchased at full price for a grave. That's the blessed life in the actual text. Land he never possessed, a nation he never saw, and a promise he took to his grave still unfinished. Whatever Barak means, it isn't a guarantee of a comfortable decade. It means God bending toward one man and putting something in his hands that was always meant for somebody else. Quick word before we keep going. If this kind of study is worth your time, subscribing genuinely helps the channel reach people who'd love it and have never found it. And if you want to go a step further, you can join as a member right from this video. Members keep the research, the writing, and the production going, and they're the reason all of it stays free for everybody who shows up. To those of you already supporting, thank you. It matters more than you know. All right. Centuries after Abram, out in the wilderness, that same word gets handed to a family of priests. Numbers 6 records the instruction to Aaron and his sons, and it's the only blessing in the Bible that comes with a script. 3 lines, 15 Hebrew words, rising in length as they go. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. In Hebrew, it's built like a staircase. The first line runs 3 words, the second runs 5, the third runs 7. Each one longer than the last, widening as it goes, the way light spreads when a door keeps opening. Read it slowly and watch where the movement is. Every single line has God as the subject and you as the object. He blesses. He keeps. He shines. He is gracious. He lifts his face. He gives. 6 verbs, all of them coming down. And the middle of it is a face, twice. His countenance shining on you, his countenance lifted toward you. That's the language of a parent looking at a child across a room, or a king who has swung in your direction and seen you standing there. In the ancient world, a face turned toward you was everything. Hiddenness meant abandonment. Being looked at meant you existed to somebody who mattered. Then comes shalom, which we translate peace, and which means a great deal more than quiet. It's wholeness. Nothing missing, nothing broken, the state of things being as they should be. Here's the line that keeps the whole thing from becoming superstition, and it's the very next verse. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. The priests speak. God blesses. The words don't carry any power on their own, and the men saying them aren't dispensing anything from a private supply. They're announcing a name over people, and the one who owns the name does the work. That single line settles a lot. The phrasing isn't a spell, the syllables carry nothing on their own, and a person could pronounce every word perfectly and change absolutely nothing, because the speaker was never the one doing the blessing. That blessing got spoken over Israel for centuries, and then, in 1979, somebody dug up a copy. A team was excavating a burial complex on a rocky slope southwest of Jerusalem's Old City, a place called Ketef Hinnom. Under a collapsed ceiling, they found a chamber that had never been robbed, and among 1,000 objects, they pulled out 2 tiny cylinders of silver. One was about as long as the last joint of your little finger. The other was smaller than a fingernail. It took years to work out how to unroll them without destroying them. When they finally did, there was writing inside. Paleo-Hebrew script, letters so small you need magnification to read them, scratched into metal foil. The words were a version of the priestly blessing from Numbers 6. They date to roughly 600 years before Christ, in the final decades before Babylon burned Jerusalem. That makes them the oldest surviving text of scripture anyone has ever found, older than the Dead Sea Scrolls by centuries. And the name of God is written out on that silver, among the earliest occurrences of it ever recovered from Jerusalem. Sit with what that means practically. Somebody in Judah, a real person with a name we'll never know, took these words seriously enough to have them inscribed in precious metal, rolled up, and worn against the body. Somebody was buried holding this blessing. Numbers has the priests speaking this out loud over a congregation, so silver worn around the neck is somebody's own devotion rather than an instruction from the text. The impulse behind it we'd recognize in a heartbeat. Somebody wanted the promise close. Somebody wanted the face of God turned toward them badly enough to keep it against their skin. Those words survived that person, survived the fall of the city, survived the exile and the empires and the centuries in the dark. And they're still being spoken over congregations this week. Now the direction flips, and this is where the knee earns its place. Open the Psalms and you keep running into a sentence that should stop you cold. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless God. Us. Blessing him. Every definition we've built so far breaks on that line. Blessing has been a downhill movement, from the one who has to the one who doesn't. God is short of nothing. He doesn't need capacity handed to him. He isn't waiting on a donkey load of bread from anybody. So how can a human being possibly bless the God who made the ability to speak in the first place? The Word gives us the answer, and it's the knee. We can't add to him. What we can do is take the posture. When David tells his own nephesh, his whole inner self, to bless the Lord, he's commanding himself to bend. To acknowledge where every good thing in his life actually came from. The verb never changes direction because the posture never changes. Blessing always involves somebody going low, and when we're the ones doing it toward God, the low position is the only honest one available. That's why Psalm 134 pairs it with a body. Lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord. The Hebrew Bible almost never talks about worship as a private mental event. It puts you in a room, on your knees, hands in the air. Deuteronomy takes it somewhere ordinary and lovely. Moses is describing the country they're about to enter, the wheat and barley and vines and olive trees. Then he says it. When you've eaten and are full, bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. That single sentence grew into a whole tradition of Jewish table blessings that continues to this day. Full stomach, bent posture, words of thanks. Look at what David actually lists in Psalm 103, right after the command to bless. Forgiveness of all his sin, healing, redemption from the pit, a crown of hesed, that thick covenant loyalty God keeps refusing to withdraw, satisfaction, renewal. Every item on that list came down. His blessing is the answer to a blessing already given, which is the only kind of blessing a creature is ever in a position to offer. We don't start the conversation, we respond to it. And I'd say that's a relief. You aren't expected to generate anything on God's behalf. You're expected to recognize what's already in your hands and bend. There's one strange corner of this word that deserves a minute, because it tells you how seriously ancient Israel took speech about God. Open Job. In the first chapter, Job is offering sacrifices for his grown children after their feasts, worried that they might have sinned in some way against God. Most English Bibles say, "cursed God in their hearts." Check the footnote, and you'll usually find a line explaining that the Hebrew word sitting there is bless. It happens 4 times in Job, and again in the story of Naboth, where 2 paid liars accuse an innocent man of a capital offense, and the verb in the accusation is Barak. Many scholars understand these as euphemism. Setting the words curse and God next to each other on a scroll struck the writer as repellent, so a substitute went in. Everyone reading knew exactly what was meant, the same way a family says somebody passed rather than using the harder word. A few scholars propose other explanations, and the discussion continues. Either way, the instinct behind it is worth pausing on. These were people who would rather write the opposite of what they meant than let an ugly phrase about the Almighty sit on a page. We've mostly lost that reflex. Might be worth borrowing a little of it back. If you want to feel what the word is doing, watch what happens whenever an adult tries to give something to a small child. A grandmother on a Sabbath afternoon, in shoes that pinch, with a 4-year-old standing in front of her, and a shoelace that came undone on the walk. She could stay upright and tell the child to try again. She doesn't. She lowers herself onto one knee on a hard floor, which at 71 is a real decision with consequences on the way back up. She gets down to where the small foot is, and she ties it. Nothing about that is efficient. Every bit of the cost lands on the person who has more, and it lands there precisely because she has more. Height, strength, and knowledge all get surrendered so the transfer can happen at the level where the child actually lives. That's the picture inside Barak. Somebody with capacity goes down to the level of somebody without it, and something real changes hands. Which brings us to the part of the Bible where the picture stops being a picture. Isaiah is writing about the day when God's claim over the world becomes undeniable, and he records this oath. I have sworn by myself, the word has gone out of my mouth in righteousness and shall not return, that to me every knee shall bow, every tongue shall swear allegiance. Every knee. The word there is Barak, the joint. The whole created order, eventually, in the same position as those camels at the well, and Solomon on his platform, and the grandmother on the floor. Everything that stands upright will fold. Then the New Testament picks up that exact line and does something with it that should never stop being startling. Paul is writing to a small congregation in Philippi, and he quotes Isaiah's oath. Every knee will bow, in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. Every tongue will confess. But he attaches it to a name, and to get there, he walks us backward through a descent nobody would have invented. He writes that Jesus, existing in the very form of God, didn't clutch at equality with God as something to be seized and held. He emptied himself. He took the form of a servant. He was born in human likeness. And having arrived here, he went lower still, obedient all the way down to death. Death by crucifixion, the execution the Roman world reserved for slaves and rebels. Down and down and down. The whole passage is a descent. And then the name that every knee in creation will bend to belongs to the one who went furthest down in the first place. You want to see it acted out? Go to the upper room the night before he died. Luke tells us that during that very meal, the disciples were arguing about which of them counted as the greatest. There was water in the room and a basin, and nobody had taken the job. So Jesus got up from supper, laid aside his outer garment, tied a towel around his waist, and went down to the level of their feet. 12 pairs. Including the feet of the man who had already arranged the betrayal. The hands that made the seas swarm with life in Genesis 1 were washing road grime off the ankles of fishermen. Now go to the very end of Luke. The resurrected Christ walks his disciples out toward Bethany, and Luke gives us the last thing they see. He lifted up his hands and blessed them. And it came to pass, while he blessed them, he was parted from them and carried up into heaven. He left mid-blessing. That's the priestly posture from Numbers 6, hands raised over the people, and the ascension interrupts it without ever finishing it. Luke doesn't record him lowering his arms. The last image the disciples carried for the rest of their lives, the one they described to their grandchildren, was the face of Jesus turned toward them with his hands up and the words still coming. Everything this word has been driving at stands there in one frame. The one before whom every knee will bend is the one who knelt. He could have demanded the posture. He took it instead. So, what do you do with a word that bends? Two things, and neither of them is complicated. The first is that blessing other people costs you altitude. If you've absorbed the Hebrew shape of this, you can't just wish good things at someone from a comfortable distance and call it done. Somebody has to come down, and something has to change hands. Abigail loaded donkeys. Jacob sent livestock. The priest stood in front of the assembly and said the name out loud over people who couldn't say it for themselves. Being a blessing to your neighbor, your brother, the person at work everyone finds difficult, means locating what you actually have and getting low enough to hand it over. Time, usually. Attention. Money sometimes. The apology you'd rather not make. It's rarely convenient, and it never happens from a standing position. The second is for whatever season you're actually in right now. Some of you are in a stretch where you have nothing to give anybody. You're the one who needs the blessing. And the shape of the word is unexpectedly good news, because from Genesis 1 forward, the direction has never depended on the receiver's condition. Fish that had existed for a few hours got blessed. A seventh day that could produce nothing got blessed. Abram, childless and elderly, and about to make several bad decisions, got blessed. In every case, the movement started at the top and came down, and nobody down here contributed anything except the willingness to be low enough to catch it. And when you can't feel any of it, you still have the one move David made. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Which is to say, bend anyway. Bending doesn't manufacture a feeling, and God isn't short on praise. Getting low is simply where creatures see clearly, and the posture stays honest on the days our emotions refuse to cooperate.